There's only been one love in my life, and my daughter killed her. I know I'm going to hell for thinking that, but it's true, isn't it? Claire was absolutely amazing, the perfect match for me. Her love and care helped sand down my sharp edges. On my birthday last year, she surprised me with an enormous box that had a baby carriage inside. Is this so you can push me around in the carriage? I'm a baby, I joked. You're not a baby. You're a father. Took me a few seconds for me to process what she had said. I looked back and forth between her patient face to the baby carriage. A father? I choked out. She nodded with a wide grin on her face. I'm going to be a father. My family had always been snarky with each other, and so my mom naturally spoke up. He isn't quite getting it yet. John, Claire is pregnant. Yeah, I got that part. I'm going to be a dad. I finally forced a big grin on my face and swept her up in a bear hug, screaming, You're going to be a mom! I could feel her giggling into my beard. Over the coming months, I felt a deeper and deeper sense of dread. I had never had a father figure. My dad had left us when I was 9, saying he couldn't do this anymore. I haven't seen him since. He wasn't even much of a dad before he left, so I guess it didn't make that much of a difference. But internally, I knew it did make a difference. What kind of dad will I be? I don't even know how to father a child, I told Claire one night. She grinned. John, do I have to explain the birds and the bees to you? You already fathered a child. That part is over. Finito. Now, as far as what kind of dad you'll be, that's something you'll figure out as you go along. Every parent is different. Raise your kid the way you wish you were raised. What does that even mean? Don't leave when the baby turns 9, I snapped. She watched me for a few seconds, studying me. John, you're scared. I took that the wrong way, replying, I'm not scared. I'm just so fucking overjoyed that I don't even know what to do. None of us do. Even those who've read all the books still don't know what to do because every single kid, every single situation, every single parent is different. You can do this. She put a gentle hand on my shoulder and, looking me in the eye, repeated, You can do this. I was still anxious about what kind of dad I would be, but she helped me every day, telling me again and again what kind of father I could be, and that just being there for our kid would be enough. We were at Walmart when her water broke. Ironically, down the mops aisle. Clean up in aisle 9, she said with a slight wince. I looked down and just completely froze. John, it's going to be all right. This is perfectly natural. We have to go to the hospital. I still couldn't move. I willed my legs to move. I willed my mouth to give soothing words, but I couldn't. She put a gentle hand on mine. It's going to be all right, okay? Everything is going to be fine. You're going to be the best dad because you're amazing. Look at how you turned out without a dad. So just think of how much better our kid will be with someone as strong as you as her dad. I finally found my voice. You think it's going to be a girl? Of course I do. Of course it will. In my family, the firstborn's always a girl. But there's a 50% chance I'm wrong. Okay, I'll call the doctor, I said, pulling out my phone. I saw her wince again. 10 hours later, she was clutching onto my hand, screaming at the top of her lungs. My hand was aching because she was squeezing it so hard. But I could take it. For her, I could take it. For our daughter, I would take it. 10 hours after that, they finally brought her into surgery for a C-section. Her blood pressure is way too high. It's not safe for her, either her or the baby. They brought her through, and I still clutched to her hand. I was probably squeezing harder now than she was. I was going to see my daughter in only a few minutes. She smiled up to me, hopped up on all the drugs they had given her. Love her with all your heart. But my heart belongs to you, I whispered. She shook her head. Our heart is one, but we pass our hearts to our children. You're not making any sense, I joked. You'll get it someday. She patted my cheeks as a tear rolled down it. Good tears. I only want good tears. Her voice was getting fainter. Drugs really must have been doing something. Honey, I will spend only good tears. Doctor, her blood pressure is falling, a nurse said. Love her with all your heart, she repeated, so faint I almost didn't hear. My daughter's first cry happened at the same time the monitor declared my wife's heart had stopped. I just stood there with a stumped expression on my face, tears begging to be let free. But they didn't come. They tried to put my daughter in my arms, but I couldn't move. I froze. I couldn't do this alone. I can't do this alone. I don't even know what kind of father I'm supposed to be. Oh, God, I gasped as the doctor called it. Time of death, 10:32 a.m. My wife was dead, and I looked at the kicking, screaming thing that killed her. I found my legs and stumbled out of the room, gasping for air. I couldn't breathe. My mom was out in the waiting room, and she came running to me. What happened? She asked as I collapsed against a wall. Could I just become the wall? Just a blank shell, no feelings. Dead. Claire's dead, I finally choked out. Tears were backing up my throat. I couldn't swallow. Oh, my God. I'm so sorry. What about the baby? She asked. I couldn't respond. I don't remember much after that for a few days. I walked around like in a fog, hearing sound, but unable to comprehend the words those sounds represented. Seeing things like through a thick glass smattered with grease. Shapes and sounds with no meaning. There was one sound and one shape that meant something. The one thing that was so clear I wish I didn't exist anymore. My daughter. They asked me to name her, but I couldn't. I just couldn't name her anything. But my mom knew what Claire had wanted to call her. Cynthia Patricia. They tried to make me hold Cynthia, but I just couldn't. I didn't trust myself not to drop her. I couldn't trust myself to not despise her for killing my wife. Logically, I know she didn't, but I still hate her. What kind of monster of a father would hate his own daughter for simply existing? It's not like she had taken a knife and stabbed her. She had simply existed. But I couldn't accept that, so I refused to hold her. My mom moved in with me temporarily, and she brought Cynthia home in the baby carriage Claire had given me for my birthday. It felt like a kick in the gut. I refused to look into the carriage and just stood there. That night, I was sitting in my chair staring at the wall, watching the mental movie of all the time I had spent with Claire. We need to talk, my mom said sternly. I didn't even look up at her, so she snapped her finger in front of my face. I finally looked up, seeing her almost for the first time. Focus. You are Cynthia's father. You need to start acting like one. Continue your grieving, but take care of your little girl, because I already raised one child alone. I don't want to raise another, especially when the father is still here. I don't think I can, I replied. Well, too damn bad. That girl in there is your daughter. You might not know how to be a dad." She drew her fingers through her hair, saying, "I know. Claire told me about that. I know you never had a father figure, and you can blame me for that if you want. But you have to define what father means to you. Don't think about your experiences of what a father was to you. You get to define right here and right now what being a father means for you and Cynthia. She needs you." I can't. She left the room, and I thought that was that. And she came back holding Cynthia and tried to hand her to me. I can't. I'll break her," I said. My mom just laughed hard. "Babies are fragile, but just holding them won't break them. I'll help you. Make sure you don't break her, but I'm not going to raise this child for you." I stood up and looked at Cynthia for the first time. My heart nearly broke, and before I knew it, I was opening the door and running. I ran for several blocks before I finally stopped and realized what I was doing. I panted, gasping for breath. Her face, her nose, those gushing brown eyes. Such curiosity in every expression, even as she slept. I used to watch Claire sleep sometimes because she would make such adorable faces. Cynthia made the same faces. When I finally got the courage to go back home, my mom was sitting in my chair. Cynthia wasn't in the room. She stood up and beckoned to me to follow her. "Do you remember how I taught you to swim?" Yeah, you had me get in the pool." She held up a wagging finger. "That's not the full story. I'd thought bringing you in through the shallow end might work, having you dip your toes in, get used to the water. But you've always been the kind of person who needs to go into the water through the deep end. So I'm going to give you that, right now." "What are you talking about?" I asked, hesitation deep in my voice. I knew that tone she was using. It was that mom-perfected disappointment that hurts you to your core until you give in. We walked into Cynthia's nursery. You don't want to hold her? Fine. Then you'll change her diapers." Oh, God. I never knew a baby could poop so much, or that wiping poop became never-ending. I wiped over and over and over, 50 wipes at least, and there was still more. "Is she leaking poop or something?" I asked, exasperated. My mom stifled a laugh. "You were just as bad when you were a baby. I swear your butt was like a fecal Niagara Falls." I smiled for the first time since Claire died, and I looked at Cynthia. I watched her bottom, her curious eyes watching me as if trying to figure me out. Good luck with that, I thought to myself. I can't even figure myself out. But then the realization that I wasn't doing this with Claire would hit me again, and I would look down at her and see my wife's killer. I kept vacillating between the two emotions of love and hate. I felt so much shame for hating a baby. I mean, what kind of monster would hate a baby? Me. And what kind of dad would a monster be? "How do you feel?" my mom asked. "Like I just mopped up a bunch of shit." "Well, you pretty much did, and you will do that many, many more times. Alone." "Ouch. Well, I'm here, but—" "I get what you're saying. You wish Claire were here." Tears threatened again, but didn't come. Several months later, on my birthday, my mom and I had a small celebration, just Cynthia, her, and me. Cynthia was on my mom's lap. I still hadn't had the courage to hold her yet. My mom looked slightly nervous. She was holding a box in her hand and looked like she was wondering whether she should give it to me or not. "What did you get me?" She slid the box to me. I opened the box, and inside was a card. It felt like the bottom of my stomach fell out as I read what was written on the card. My father's name, followed by an address and phone number. "What?" was all I was able to get out. "Claire wanted you to have this. She knew you were struggling with what it meant to be a father. She thought this might help bring you some closure. So she searched online and found your father's contact information. I probably shouldn't have given it to you because you're going through so much already. You don't need to deal with his crap. I just stared at the card, memorizing every detail of it. This was Claire's present to me. She wanted me to be a good dad. I thought I would be a good dad. I cleaned Cynthia's diapers, but was that really what it means to be a good dad? And I'll leave it at that for today's part of the story. Tomorrow we'll wrap it up with part 3 of The Baby. I tried to gather up the courage to call him, but I just couldn't do it. And one day, almost without realizing it, I found that I was driving towards his address. I parked outside his house and walked up the walkway to his front door. His yard was well maintained. I guess I had thought he would be the kind of person who would let his own lawn get bad and overgrown, not well manicured. I tripped on something and saw it was a skateboard. My father had a skateboard? I was just about to knock when a teenager opened the door and blew past me, almost knocking me down. "You can't tell me what to do," he yelled at someone inside. "I can when you live in my house," a deep voice called from within. "Then maybe I don't want to live in your house." And with that, the kid kicked up his skateboard and walked off. The door was still open, so I didn't really know what to do. Walking in would probably be a faux pas. "Can I help you? We aren't interested in buying anything or converting to any religion." A voice came from inside, the same voice as before. I wanted to answer, "And what about being a father?" but I held off on that. "Are you Arnold Rose?" "Yeah, who are you?" He walked out into the light. He was my same height. Was that your son?" I asked, looking after the kid skateboarding away. "Yeah, sorry you had to see that. Now, who are you and what do you want?" "Do you recognize me?" I asked. He glanced at me with squinted eyes. "Nope, not at all. Look, are you going to tell me who you are or not?" "I'm your son." The color seemed to drain from his face. My wife found your information, and I'm a dad now? You're a grandfather." "Well, this is awkward," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know what to say." "How do I be a dad?" I asked, jumping straight into the question that I had been wondering. He let out a snort. "You think I would know how to be a dad? I left you and your mother when you were 9. "Arnold, who are you talking to?" a woman's voice called from inside. "Look, now's not the right time to do this. How about we set up a time some other time, where we can sit down and talk?" "Oh, okay, how about tonight around 6 at my house?" "Sure, yeah, sure, works for me. I gotta go." I gave him my address, and with that, he shut the door. When I finally got home, I found my mom packing. "What's going on?" I asked, with desperation and terror interlacing my voice. She answered, "John, I'm heading out of town this weekend." "But what about Cynthia?" I asked. "You'll take care of her." I looked at Cynthia, and she looked up at me. I don't know if I'm just projecting here, but I swear both of us looked like deer in the headlights. To my shame, I still hadn't held her. Every time I tried to work up the courage, a crippling fear of being inadequate overtook me, and so I never picked her up. I'll take care of her? Come on, John, you can do this. All I've been able to do is change her diapers." "Well, what can I say?" She put a hand on my cheek and gave me 2 soft slaps, whispering, "Deep end. You got this." When she finally left, I started really feeling the terror. "Well, I guess it's just you and me." I said to Cynthia. She just stared at me, probably judgmentally. I went to the calendar to see when the last time she'd been fed. One of the things my mom had set up was a whiteboard calendar that split up each day into morning, afternoon, and evening. Cynthia was last fed a few hours ago, so she was up for another feeding now. When I gave her the bottle, I sat her up in the carriage and put my arm behind her back to help her stay sitting up. I was comfortable with this. I mean, not physically comfortable, but what can I say? I looked down at her sucking on the bottle, and I noticed that she was a little red. Once she was done, I put my hand on her forehead, and it seemed like she was a little hot. But that might have just been my hot hands, I'm not sure. I looked at the clock, which read 4 p.m., 2 hours until my father arrived. I walked her around the house in her carriage. An hour later, I checked her forehead again. It definitely seemed like she was warmer, but I wasn't sure about that. And then I remembered the thermometer Claire and I kept in the bathroom and rushed to grab it. This would help me get a baseline. 99.5 degrees. That's concerning. I searched Google to find out at what temperature should you bring up your baby in. Then Cynthia started crying, and it wasn't her usual crying that I had heard up until this point. It was a completely different kind of crying. 30 minutes later, her temperature was 100 degrees. It was rising. I started pacing around. I was supposed to bring her in if her temperature rose above 102 degrees or if she seemed sick. She was crying, so do I bring her in now or not? I wondered. 15 minutes later, her temperature was up to 100.5 degrees. Cynthia was screaming at this point. I looked at the clock. My dad was supposed to be here any minute. But she was in pain. My daughter was in pain. My daughter could die. I don't want her to die. I didn't want her to die. But my dad could tell me what it means to be a dad, why he left me, why he abandoned me. But what could he tell me about being a dad? Closure wouldn't bring back Claire. Love her with all your heart. Claire's final words. My heart had been broken in two, and I was so scared that I would lose Cynthia too. So I fought the fear of inadequacy, and I picked her up from the baby carriage. She felt too hot against me, but it also felt right to hold her. I ripped open the door to see my father's knuckle about to knock on my door. You have to get us to the hospital, I demanded. He froze for a second before running to his car. I got in the car and just held her to me because my father didn't have a car seat. I called my mom on her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Cynthia's temperature is 100.5 degrees. Dad and I are taking her to the hospital now. I remember car horns honking at us the whole way to the hospital, but that was the only thing I noticed. I thought about how she had felt against me, how she feels against me. The tension I had been holding since Claire died seemed to let go when I held her. I held my daughter for the first time in 4 months, and I know I should have felt shame, but that didn't help either of us. That didn't help either of us then. That is part of what it means to be a dad, overcoming your own fears and doing what is best for them. Have I been inadequate for the past 4 months? Probably, but I have the rest of her life to do better, to be better. She was so hot, and she seemed to be slipping in and out of consciousness. I just looked at her beautiful face, so red. I saw Claire in her eyes, in her nose. I couldn't lose her too. I just couldn't. A tear finally escaped my eyes, the first tear since Claire died. The tears flowed freely after that. I put her up to my mouth and whispered in her ear how much I loved her, how much I missed her mother, how glad I was that she was with me now. So please just stay strong and stay alive. I repeated it into her ear, a mantra so that she might live. By the time we had pulled up to the hospital, we were both covered in tears and snot. My dad ripped open the car door and grabbed Cynthia from my arms. "I've got her. You come on your own time." I got out and rushed after him, the ground unsteady beneath my feet. A few hours later, we were standing outside the nursery, looking in on Cynthia. She was sleeping, and the doctors were certain she'll pull through. My mom was rubbing my back. She arrived an hour after we got here, panic in her voice as she screamed for me. I rushed to her and told her everything was going to be okay. "Could you give us a minute?" my dad asks her quietly. Mom turned up her nose and walked off. They still don't like each other, but they were together during this one day for me and Cynthia. "You asked me what it means to be a dad. Well, I've been thinking about that all day." He let out a sigh and looked up, as if trying to collect his thoughts like butterflies from air. "It means not being what I've been. I'm a father right now, but I'm not a dad. A dad is someone who sacrifices and overcomes his fears to do what is right for his child. My advice is to be what I have never been. Be the man who I saw tonight, who saw his child in need and did what was comfortable, terrifying. Be you, John. That's all you will have to be. Just be yourself. Don't try to be anyone else. So I should probably go. I don't think your mom likes me being here." "Will you come back?" I asked, leaving unsaid the question of if he will abandon me again. "I will. I've got a granddaughter now," he said, shaking his head unbelieving. "I will come back for both of you, because I might have messed up being a dad to you, but I hope I can make amends with you and Cynthia. I have to be a better dad to my other son." "Yeah, you have to introduce me to him." One thing at a time. He's kind of an asshole. Isn't that the nature of all teenagers? I wouldn't really know, but I have heard that to be the case. I have to get going." He started to leave before I called out, "Hey, Dad. You already started making amends by helping me get here." "Thank you," he said, his voice catching. "That means so much to me." "Well, that's the last time I'm leaving you home with the baby," my mom said after Dad had left. I chuckled. "Yeah, well, maybe you can go out of town every now and then when you want. I think we'll be fine now. I will still need your help. I'm not changing any more Niagara Falls diapers." "I don't blame you." I looked into the nursery at my beautiful daughter. Whoever she decided to be, whoever she really is, I will love her. I still love my wife. But I have a beautiful daughter who needs me to take care of her. I guess there have been only two loves in my life, and that has made all the difference in the world.